Exactly 12 years ago this past Friday, a Boeing 777 passenger plane left Amsterdam bound for Kuala Lumpur. The 283 passengers on board were mostly Dutch, Malaysian, and Australian citizens, along with 15 Malaysia Airlines crew members. Within a few hours of takeoff, their bodies lay dead in the fields of eastern Ukraine. There were no survivors. All crew and passengers, among whom were 20 families and 80 children, were killed. Why are we talking about this plane crash more than a decade later? Well, for starters, it remains the single largest airline disaster of its kind in history. And by that, I mean it's the largest mass casualty event in which a commercial passenger plane was shot down by militant forces. In this case, using a Buk 9M38 surface-to-air missile, developed by the Soviet Union in the 1980s and illegally transported to Ukraine's Donbass region in 2014 by the Russian military. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv. On the 12th anniversary of the MH17 disaster, we're going to look at some of the lesser-known details and how the legacy of the crash echoes through time, as the start of an ongoing nightmare for the people of Donbass, as a shakeup of notions about modern air safety, and as a grim warning about the difficulties of holding terrorists responsible for crimes committed in international zones like airspace. The lessons of MH17 are relevant to everyone, no matter where you are. Because although there are no planes flying over Ukraine today, there are definitely planes flying in airspace of equal risk to that of Ukraine's in 2014. And the struggle to bring the perpetrators of the MH17 tragedy to justice, combined with what Russia has gone on to do afterwards, illustrates just how much we stand to lose when we allow such acts to go unpunished. To start, I want to give you an idea of just how horrific the crash was, and be warned, this part might be upsetting. I'm joined by Ukrainian journalist and photographer Evgeniy Maloletka, who was on the scene that day.
I was going, to the crash site, and there I saw, already the bodies. You see the smashed, possessions, the pictures, some toys, and parts of the plane. And there was at that time there was a separatist, Russian Buk forces already were on the place, and we were trying to find some pictures to do photographs of the aftermath of these attacks. So we saw a lot of human bodies who were fell down from the plane from the high altitude, and they were smashed. And later the rescuers came, and some volunteers from the coal mines, and they start to do a search through the fields, going by the human chain, and trying to put marks where the remains of the human bodies are, to take all the parts of it. So, and at that time there was super hot weather, and the bodies who fell on the asphalt, and there was a sign and of these accidents, and you can feel the smell of the bodies, which is on the hot weather, which were not moved, to the refrigerators yet. Some of the bodies fell through the roofs and came to the people's houses. And, you can see the hole, through the people, and inside there is a body. So, it was shocking. Then our colleagues found parts of the plane which was with the sign of the shrapnel, and that can be identified as this plane was intercepted by anti-aircraft missile. So and you saw all their materials in the public, in the court. So yeah, but this was a huge like tragedy, and I never saw so many human bodies which were killed recently. So, and especially as well like kids, and it was shocking. It was really shocking.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region began several months before the downing of MH17, in April of 2014. The early stages were carried out by a combination of covert Russian military personnel and Ukrainian separatists who were armed and supported by the Russian military, as in the invasion and annexation of Crimea several months before that. As early as March of 2014, large commercial airlines were becoming dubious about the safety of flying over parts of Ukraine due to the burgeoning conflict. But it's important to note that the regions considered most high risk did not include the site where MH17 was shot down. And just quickly, I'll note that before Russia's invasion, Ukraine's air traffic industry made a substantial amount of money from overflight fees. Given its size and its location, Ukraine's airspace was a natural route for planes going between Europe and Asia. The size of the aircraft and the length of the journey determine the overflight fee that a country collects for letting planes into their airspace. And this means that there's incentive on both sides, for both the host country and the foreign airline, to keep the most efficient routes open. Airlines don't want to take more expensive, longer routes, and countries don't want to lose the revenue from planes flying overhead. So if it seems crazy that airlines were still flying over Ukraine when conflict seemed to be building, it's actually not so surprising. But anyway, back to 2014. Multiple Ukrainian military aircraft were shot down by separatist forces in the months leading up to the MH17 disaster, and one incident 3 days prior in which a Ukrainian An-26 was shot down indicated that the separatists possessed surface-to-air missile capabilities. And this was particularly concerning because without full command and control infrastructure, it's not always possible for operators to differentiate between a military airplane and a civilian airplane when firing these weapons. Extensive investigation has pieced together the following evidence about the day of the disaster. Intercepted communications from separatist commanders indicate that they didn't intend to shoot down a commercial airliner. They thought it was yet another Ukrainian military plane, and they were surprised later to learn that the plane had been carrying civilian passengers.
Стопудово гражданский борт. Понятно. А этот, как народу много там? Это пиздец. Обломки прямо во дворы падали тут. Вот так. Из вооружения есть что-нибудь? Вообще ничего. Гражданские вещи, медицинские ошметки, там полотенце такое, туалетная бумага.
Now, military and civilian airplanes of that size fly at the same altitude. And like I said, a Buk missile itself can't differentiate between targets once it's been fired at something. No one knows exactly what the crew and passengers' final moments were like. But what is known is that around 4 p.m. local time, the missile exploded outside MH17's cockpit, immediately killing 3 crew members. Shrapnel hit the plane's wings and body, the cabin depressurized, causing the plane to break into pieces. There's no way of knowing if some passengers survived part of the way to the ground as the plane disintegrated, but what is known is that none were alive within a few minutes of the missile being fired. It's the rapid disintegration from explosive decompression that led to the images we now have of the crash site. Plane parts, seats, luggage, and bodies, they didn't fall to the ground in a single unit. They were scattered over 50 square kilometers. And I want to take a moment to touch on something that we'll examine in more detail later. The description of MH17's final moments are horrifying for anyone who's ever flown on an airplane. But there was a parallel horror unfolding on the ground. For the residents of Hrabove, a small village near the border between Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, this was a normal summer day. Their Ukrainian majority village had been taken over by Russian-backed separatists in April, but not through active combat. At that point, there was no way of knowing that they were facing years of Russian occupation and warfare. In the sense that we think of it, this was not an active conflict zone. This was not near a major airport. The closest one was in Donetsk city, about 90 kilometers away, and it had been closed since May. So for the residents of this rural area, there was suddenly a foreign commercial airliner crashing to the ground, hundreds of bodies scattered, and the whole world asking what had happened. There's actually a movie based on the MH17 disaster called Klondike, and to me, the scariest shot in it is when two characters are talking in a field, and behind them you see a missile launcher being wheeled into frame in the distance, and to me this illustrates so painfully that this war is something that was forced on the people of Donbass, and there's nothing natural about an invading force bringing weapons of mass death to an otherwise peaceful landscape. And all members of the joint investigation have supported the conclusion put forth by the Netherlands about who was responsible for the crash. And it's the same country that's responsible for the years of war that have followed. Russia. I don't know any better example than this story of why on-the-ground reporting matters, why it's important to have witnesses to tragedies who can recount their experiences, even years later. We at the Kyiv Independent are honored to be your eyes on the ground in Ukraine now, during Russia's full-scale invasion. But it's only possible thanks to viewers like you. With a small contribution each month, you can help support independent journalism and keep us reporting for the long haul, because we're here for it. For more information about how to join the Kyiv Independent community, visit the link in the description below. The initial on-the-ground efforts after the crash were focused on recovering bodies, with identification of remains taking months to complete. But the investigation into the cause of the crash was underway within a day. Under international aviation law, investigating a plane crash is the job of the country where the plane goes down, unless they delegate it to another country, which Ukraine did. Given that 2/3 of the passengers on MH17 were Dutch nationals, the Dutch Safety Board launched an immediate technical investigation, followed shortly after by a separate criminal investigation. Within a month, the Netherlands had established a joint investigation team with Australia, Malaysia, Belgium, and of course Ukraine, who worked together to collect evidence even as combat operations intensified around the site of the crash. Very soon after the crash, Ukrainian and American sources voiced suspicion that the attack could only have been carried out with a Buk, a hypothesis that became more certain as the remains of the plane were examined. But there was still the question of who launched the missile and from where. Various eyewitnesses from towns in separatist-controlled parts of Donetsk Oblast confirmed that they'd seen a Buk-style launcher in the area in recent months, including 2 journalists from the Associated Press who reported seeing a Buk transported by non-Ukrainian military personnel with Russian accents prior to the MH17 shootdown. On October 13, 2015, the Dutch Safety Board announced with certainty that the crash had been caused by a Buk, and that it had been fired from somewhere within a triangulated region of Ukrainian territory. The criminal investigation into the crash was the largest in Dutch history. Between 2014 and 2018, the joint investigation team collected evidence that concluded that the missile system used in the attack was the property of Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade.
This is how we were able to establish the route and figure out that it came from the 53rd Aircraft Brigade in Kursk. It was brought to the border by the 2nd Division.
In May of 2018, the Netherlands and Australia issued a statement holding Russia responsible for the downing of MH17. The following year, the Dutch Public Prosecution Service issued arrest warrants for 4 individuals, including infamous Russian warlord Igor Girkin, for their direct responsibility for causing the flight crash. 3 were convicted and sentenced to life by the Dutch District Court in 2022, although all were in absentia. It wouldn't be until Girkin started criticizing his longtime ally Vladimir Putin in 2023 that he'd find himself in jail on extremism charges, albeit in Russia. The whereabouts of the other 2 convicted men remain unknown. In July of 2025, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia was responsible for the downing of the plane and the deaths of everyone on board. It also stated that Russia had failed to perform or cooperate with any investigation, had in fact actively hindered investigative efforts, and had caused additional harm to the families of victims through continued denial and obstruction of justice. To this day, Russia denies responsibility for the crash. We visited the Dutch embassy in Kyiv to speak with the ambassador about the Netherlands' quest for justice.
The shooting down of MH17 on the 17th of July 2014 is still a national tragedy. It left a deep scar in Dutch society. And together with Malaysia and Australia, we fought for justice. And it seems that we're getting justice. So far we got it. Bringing perpetrators to justice has been a top priority for the Netherlands. And we've been working very hard from the beginning with Australia and Malaysia in the joint investigation team. This was the team that together with Ukraine and Ukrainian assistance looked for evidence and facts on the ground based on which a legal procedure could be started. And this led to proceedings in Strasbourg, in The Hague and some other places, and clear verdicts from independent courts that Russia, the Russian Federation, was to be held accountable for the downing of MH17 and the death of 298 people.
Russia has denied and continues to categorically deny responsibility. They've put forth conspiracy theories and blamed Ukraine. How has the Netherlands countered that narrative?
Well, we combat it with facts and evidence. We don't deal with conspiracy theories. The best way to deal with it is what this joint investigation team did. And based on facts and based on evidence, we have verdicts of the courts, and that's the best way to deal with it.
And what lessons can other countries take, whether it's about holding countries accountable for these kind of crimes or real-time airline safety? What lessons can people take from this tragedy?
Well, you know, every sad tragedy has as a consequence the opportunity or maybe the obligation to learn from it. And also from this tragedy with MH17, lessons were learned and they were put into international legislation, for example on sky safety, but also international overflight. So I think the rules regarding flying over, civil aviation flying over areas in conflict have been changed. The whole system of risk assessment and risk management has been adapted as well.
In examining the ripple effects of MH17, we also wanted to hear from those for whom the tragedy will always be present, the loved ones of the passengers. We spoke with the Main Memorial Foundation in the Netherlands about the task of keeping the memory alive, the grief that's still felt years later, and the ongoing fight for justice. Can you just tell us a bit about what you do?
Our organization is founded in November 2014 because the next of kin thought it's better to be together. Together we are strong, and since that I'm involved with the foundation.
It's such a crime that it's difficult to imagine a feeling where justice has been served. Like it's so far.
No, justice hasn't been served yet. There are still a lot of questions who are open, and we've had the criminal trial, of course, in the Hague, and 3 people are convicted to life sentences. But they are free now. They're living under protection of the Russian government. But we still don't know who shot, which person shot down the plane and why did they shoot it down? Who was in the end responsible for the shooting down of flight MH17? We don't know. The Russians, of course, they denied everything, but they were there. The little green men were there, and there was a fighting over there. And flight MH17 was shot down by a Russian system with Russian soldiers over there.
And from everything you've said, I understand you had a family member who was involved in the crash.
3. My brother, his wife, and their son, and a friend of their son. My brother is one of the victims who was never found. There are 2 victims who aren't found yet. You know, there are so many more people have died in Ukraine. So much thousands of people who died there. Our grief, of course, is there, but the grief in of the people in Ukraine is so much bigger.
Yeah. Incidentally, an air raid siren is going off right now, which is a horrible illustration. But on that point, I want to ask, what are sort of the ways that you've found to honor those whose lives were taken by Russia that day?
Every year we organize a commemoration. Next Friday, there's on the 17th of July, we have again a commemoration at the National Monument MH17 in Vijfhuizen. And we also care about the flight safety above conflict areas. So there are the Netherlands and Canada. They organized the Safer Skies Forum, where they talk about how to make the skies safer for airplanes. Because if you are in an airplane above a conflict area, you are sitting ducks. We experience how terrible it is when an airplane with your families is shot down. So we do our best to prevent this in the future. But it's very difficult for us, as I said before, that we still don't know why they shot down. Was it an accident? Was it a drunk soldier who accidentally fired a missile, or was it real targeted as the plane? We don't know, and it's very important for us to know. Once we don't know if we will ever know it, but for us it's very important. 298 people died for nothing. They are just tourists. They were just crew members, and they are one of the more than 160 airplanes who flew over that area that day. And it may be coincidence that it was this airplane from Malaysian Airlines. I think most of us will die before we know what happened, but we'll keep on fighting until we know what's the truth. And the Russian government never took any responsibility for downing the flight MH17. That's for us very important. So I hope there will be a moment in the future, but I think we have to wait until Putin isn't there anymore. Maybe, we hope so.
As I touched on earlier, the downing of MH17 was also a deeply traumatic moment for the people of Donbass and all of Ukraine. And unfortunately, as you well know, 2014 was just the start of a nightmare that continues to this day. At the time of the crash, there was hope within Ukraine that Russia's crime would warrant a swift international reaction, that those responsible would be caught and tried by international tribunals, that justice would be served and a stop would be put to the growing conflict that Russia was instigating. This was not the case. Russia and its actors may have been handed sentences, but justice has never been served. The extent to which such acts emboldened Russia in subsequent years cannot be underestimated, and the implications reach far beyond this war. Because what the MH17 disaster showed us is that this kind of crime, with hundreds of civilian deaths and investigations spearheaded by multiple countries, wasn't enough to bring perpetrators to meaningful justice or end the instigating country's imperial agenda. Airline safety guidelines can be updated to perfection, and condemnations can be as harsh in wording as possible, but there still needs to be a system in place to definitively find, prosecute, and punish those who disregard international law. In researching and writing this episode, I kept asking myself, where are the places in the world where this could happen now? I can certainly think of a few destinations considered a bit risky where commercial airlines are still flying, where we'd retroactively kick ourselves for ignoring the signs if something like this happened, and where we'd once again likely fail to enact swift justice. The best safeguard against that happening is to treat the MH17 disaster for what it was: an act of terrorism by Russia against multiple countries, and one in a now countless string of war crimes perpetuated by Russia in more than 12 years of genocidal war against Ukraine.
Hi, my name is Yulia Taraduk, and I'm the Kyiv Independence reporter covering the war and Russian-occupied Ukraine. And today's member question is, have some of the Ukrainian children that have been abducted been found. From my small understanding, Trump's cut on several organizations has impeded on the research teams. So that's the really important question. And as of today, Ukraine has verified more than 20,000 cases of children who were forcibly transferred by Russia from the Russian-occupied territories. But that's the only number of cases that investigators have been able to confirm with the child's identity, as the representatives of the Bring Kids Back initiative told the Kyiv Independent. And it doesn't mean that Ukraine knows where all of those children are today. And of course, the real number of affected children is likely much more higher than the verified figure. And like Ukrainian officials estimate the real figure of abducted children could be far higher. For example, Ukraine's human rights ombudsman Dmytro Lubinets put the number up to 150,000. And Russia is actively trying to raise identity, like Ukrainian identity of children, by changing their names, issuing Russian passports, altering official records, and placing children into Russian families or institutions. But the good news is that Ukrainian children are still being brought home, and through the Bring Kids Back UA initiative, and the work of other Ukrainian institutions, non-governmental organizations, and with the help of international partners, more than 2,000 of Ukrainian children have been returned so far. But thousands are still missing or remain under Russian control, so the work still needs to be done. It's also very important to understand that forced abduction is only part of the problem, because more than 1 million of Ukrainian children are living under Russian occupation, and there they are exposed to systematic indoctrination and militarization. And Russia doesn't always need to move children anywhere from Russian occupied territories. It can do that where they live. Regarding US funding cuts, it's true that the Trump administration ended funding for Yale Humanitarian Research Lab, which had been documented deported children. However, that didn't stop the broader effort, and the lab existing data was preserved. Its work continues with private funding, and many Ukrainian agencies and international partners and civil society organizations are still working together to identify, locate, and bring Ukrainian children home.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.